I took my team and we said, what is this the right tool? Does it just need tuning? Are there better tools in place? And we started looking at what we could do across the organization. Because we had examples like that, developers couldn't even look at findings, but other ones still, it wasn't tuned. There were a lot of false positives. Developers didn't want to look at it. The tools were there, but they weren't really being used. And then once we found something that fit well with what the developers were using, fitted into the workflow, we actually got it rolled out to a lot more teams. Rolled out across the organization. Developers really liked it. That was an important thing, was just looking at how can we, execute out of our pipelines where everything else was. One of the reasons we had to go that way for some other things was we had a couple languages that were used on one-off applications that weren't yet supported by GitHub Advanced Security, the code QL scanning. So we looked at other tools that could integrate into, the flows as well and still have findings in the same place.
Welcome to the season 3 of The Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host and AppSec enthusiast and growth manager at Escape. Today, I'm joined by Linda Fay, a seasoned leader in application security with over 13 years of experience in AppSec. She's led large-scale security programs, most recently as Director of Product Security Engineering. Now, working as an independent consultant, she helps organizations improve their AppSec posture and explore the intersection of AI and security. Linda also leads the OWASP Nashville chapter and is deeply involved with WiCyS, mentoring the next generation of women in cybersecurity. In this episode, we dive into whether it's possible to find AppSec tools that developers actually love, regardless of their acronyms, and how the rapid rise of AI is reshaping the security tooling. Linda also shares her experience justifying security budgets in the absence of compliance mandates and how she managed to save over $600,000 annually by streamlining AppSec tools. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. With that, get ready to hear Linda's opinions. Dive right in. Hi, Linda. Thank you so much for joining the Elephant and AppSec podcast. I'm super excited to have you on board and have a conversation together today, especially just after International Women's Day. I'm so happy actually to have personally more experts like you coming and sharing their experience. And it's also sometimes tough. So
yeah, no, thanks.
Yes.
I appreciate you reaching out. So thanks. Yeah.
And I really want to know more about what you learned. I think you have now years of experience. You spent years, implementing different AppSec tools, building AppSec programs, across thousands of different lines of code and code repositories. I'm sure AppSec is not really, I think the only thing you mentioned that you now kind of need to learn is AI security, because I think it's, in cybersecurity, we never stop learning. And for sure.
So I've been in AppSec for more than 10 years now. I have dealt with many different tools, and you're right, AI is taking over everything. So trying to figure out where that fits in, and does that change anything for us?
And right now, do you think it changes something?
I don't know if it changes necessarily, but hopefully it's going to make using some of the tools or sorting through results a lot easier, because some of the challenges that any tool has is false positives and trying to find a tool. There's no tool that works for every, application, every code repository, everything, because everybody does something slightly different. So that's why there's a lot of tuning involved with all the tools and trying to get it working. So hopefully AI can help with some of that and figure out, especially when you get into some of like your open source vulnerabilities and things like that. Do you have reachability to the actual vulnerable functions? Helps with prioritization and things like that. So hopefully it'll make everybody's lives a lot easier.
Yeah, at least that's what I hope to see right now. Honestly, I've been using AI for prioritization of some tasks, and it does make life easier. It takes some time, I think, at the beginning to filter it out, to create the right prompt to make sure it gives you the right result, but with the right prompt, it gets really much better over time. And you mentioned like so many security tools. Like, have you ever met actually a developer that actually likes security tools you've implemented?
I think that developers, I won't say necessarily like security tools, but finding tools that implement into their processes or their workflows, they'll see that help make their lives easier. Anything that doesn't add friction to them, helping them to still move fast, enable them to build secure software, are things that they like and things that they appreciate.
Yeah. And did you see more impact in the IDE or in CI/CD? Did you feel like the more, to the left you go, the better it is? Or is it actually a myth?
I think it's a combination of, definitely the sooner you find things, the easier it is to fix them. But the whole shift left feels like we're pushing a whole lot of stuff on developers who already have a lot of work to do. They're trying to meet business needs, business requirements, push stuff out as fast as they can for the business, trying to throw extra requirements on top of them, expecting them to be security, not necessarily experts, but almost experts because we don't have enough security people. It's really tough. So getting tools that can fit with what they're already using, because again, you don't want them to have to, I'm in GitHub all day and then I have to go turn around in tool X to scan my code, or another tool to look at results. So anything that can pull things together for them makes it a lot easier, and then developers do very much appreciate that, and that enables them to move faster.
And what advice would you give, to AppSec engineer who still has, that mindset a little bit that the developers must be know everything about security? Because I think it's kind of divided. And the more mature you get in a profession, the more you realize your expectations, shouldn't be the same, but in the beginning.
Right. I think any application security engineer that thinks developers need to know everything, you turn around and say, well, then your application security engineers need to know everything about the applications. Especially if you work in a large organization, there's no way that those AppSec engineers know everything about every application. So it's got to be a collaboration between the teams to be effective.
And what is kind of the main, reason where this collaboration actually doesn't work sometimes?
Well, you see a lot of times where there's still these silos, or security is still seen as the team of no. We try really hard not to do that. I have a leader who says that we don't want to be the team of no NO, we want to be the team of no KNOW. So we need to help teams do that. Again, that collaboration is really what helps things work best. So security engineers need to have a bit of empathy and understand where developers are coming from, and the fact that they have a lot of other things on their plates as well. I think every developer wants to do the right thing. It's just prioritization, and getting the time to do it. So understanding that, and security engineers, yes, get hyper-focused on, here's a vulnerability, here's this, but is that really the most important thing? So understanding how to assess that risk, and maybe it doesn't need to be fixed right now, but it can go in the backlog for the next sprint, or the next release, or something like that, and understanding that. And then having developers understand the security perspective as well, because there are times where developers don't really understand how something can be exploited, so they won't necessarily push to prioritize that. So again, having that collaboration, that common understanding helps both sides.
Yeah, I think common understanding probably also comes with the time, that where you build those relationships in the beginning, like when you just arrive, it's very hard, especially if you have a lean security team. And sometimes at the beginning, I don't know how it was, in your experience, but yeah, if you have a lean security team, it's very, very hard to prioritize where you spend time on relationships, where you spend time on as well.
Yes, building those relationships are very important. One thing I've always tried to do when I hire AppSec engineers is make sure that they come from that development background, so that they understand that. So they've been a developer, even if it's just a year or two, at least that they've done that before coming into AppSec, so that they can relate to the developers a lot more easily.
I think you mentioned as well that it's super important that the tools fit within the workflow. Like, it's not about being on the left, but it's more about fitting within developer workflow. Do you have actually concrete example where you created or improved this workflow for them with the, let's say, security tools that you implemented, or what you would recommend, for someone who's listening to us, like what workflow they should create?
I will say I am a big fan of GitHub and their advanced security. So I use that at my last company. We actually replaced a whole bunch of tools with that, and having that, so CodeQL, Dependabot, Secret Scanner, all scanning right in GitHub where developers are already working, really works well. When we switched that over, our developers loved that just because it wasn't one more tool. Like previously, they'd have to log into a different tool to go look at the results. We tried doing a vulnerability management platform to consolidate all the findings, but again, that's still one extra tool that they have to go log into and look at and figure out what to do. Having it right in there helps them. Then getting scanning on their pull requests, right away when they're already in GitHub really helps, so they can catch things early on. If they can, fix it right then, but otherwise it's, there in their face for next time they're working on that code so that they can do it. Having a lot of that kind of stuff, and then just having the workflows built into their GitHub Actions and work through that. Again, I mentioned GitHub Advanced Security. Other tools can be integrated into those actions as well, depending on what you like, but just having something into the tools that they're already using instead of trying to create separate tools has been, a godsend. Really, like, developers really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think on your side as well, it helps to justify the cost reduction to the CISO, because I saw, on your profile that you succeeded to reduce the security tool budget by 600,000. If I'm not, so this was the example as well for that, right?
Yes, yeah, because looking at, so at that company, we actually had several different tools that were doing the same thing. So kind of looking at where can we consolidate, find tools that works for everybody, instead of having, there's no one tool that works perfect for everything, but what works good enough.
Yeah.
And then I actually did kind of supplement with other open source tools and kind of looking at that. So rather than spending extra money, because nothing's going to be perfect, but you don't have to spend the same amount of money on something that maybe isn't your high risk application, doesn't have a whole lot of high risk vulnerabilities in it. So just like understanding the landscape, the development landscape, the applications, find what works best for most, and then figure out, are there other ways that you can supplement things?
Was there like a light bulb moment when you decided, okay, now it's time to change? Or was it a part of a more longer, AppSec program that was in place?
I had always, since I started, kind of looked at where can we consolidate, where can we tune things. There was, and I won't say what scanner this was, but it was kind of thrown out there. And we literally it wasn't tuned at all. It had a whole lot of problems. Was throwing up over 1 million findings out of an application, which wasn't true. I mean, there were a lot of false positives and other things, but it was so bad that you couldn't even open the results to see what those findings were.
Okay, so that's it's basically useless. It's just a noise.
Yeah. So I took my team and we said, what is this the right tool? Does it just need tuning? Are there better tools in place? And we started looking at what we could do across the organization, to figure out what works best. How do we get things tuned? And then because we had examples like that, developers weren't looking at well, that one they couldn't even look at findings, but other ones still, it wasn't tuned. There were a lot of false positives. Developers didn't want to look at it. So the tools were there, but they weren't really being used.
Okay.
We said, hey, what can we do? A, to get better results. B, make it easier, less friction. And C, make it actually get used. Finding tools that fit across the organization. And then once we found something that fit well with what the developers were using, fit it into the workflow, we actually got it rolled out to a lot more teams, rolled out across the organization. And then again, developers really liked it, so we had a lot more success with something like that.
I think it's super nice to see that actually you're making an impact not only on the numbers but also on how people perceive the result, at least in the developers. And you mentioned some open source tools that you've used. Do you have any recommendations?
I'll say SemGrep is one that we used a little bit of. I know that they've recently kind of split off as well.
Controversy, a big controversy.
Yes.
There.
Yes, but some tools like that, they also can get their findings integrated into GitHub. So again, that was an important thing, was just looking at how can we, execute out of our pipelines where everything else was. One of the reasons we had to go that way for some other things was we had a couple languages that were used on one-off applications that weren't yet supported by GitHub Advanced Security, the code QL scanning. So we looked at other tools that could do it, but that could integrate into, the flows as well and still have findings in the same place.
Were there like how often did it come to you that developers wanted to use a new framework and you kind of had to figure out whether or not the security tool is actually testing for that?
Early on, we had a lot of different frameworks. I mean, and still do across the organization. But once we had tools that people really understood and knew, they tried to make, say, a more conscious effort to make sure that it was supported by the tool. There are still instances where things come up that may not, or maybe the tool doesn't support it yet. And then we would talk about, what's the business case for using this framework versus, using something that is supported and trying to stick with what is supported. At the end of the day, we're always there to help the business, help development. So if it's something that was really needed, we'd have to go find something else to work with them. But again, like I said, we try not to tell the developers no, it's the how can you do what you want to do in the most secure manner.
Yeah, but it's nice that they had this reflection, like, okay, is it going to be supported? Yes or no? At least that's kind of reflection, other way around.
Right.
As well.
Yeah, and that takes a while of building up those relationships with the development teams, building the trust, being able to support, what they need over time, getting the tools, to be something that they trust. So again, it's that relationships and trust is really important.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's honestly in AppSec, like that's the thing that comes up the most. I think I had the conversation recently about how also landscape has changed from like someone having, let's say, not enough technical skills in AppSec, and everyone was telling you have to get this, you have to understand the cloud, you have to get like technical skills, have to understand everything about DevSecOps. But now everyone is telling you have to get soft skills, actually, and the soft skills are the most important. Is it like throughout your 10 years, have you seen also this change happening? Or
Yes, and that's like not just AppSec, but across security, and even, risk and compliance is those relationships are really important in helping build that trust and then the communication side of it as well. So if I didn't have those soft skills, that communication, being able to explain a vulnerability, developers are just going to be like, why do we need to do this? I don't understand it. Whereas once you've built that trust, even if they don't quite understand it, they feel more comfortable coming and asking questions about it to try and understand it a little bit better. So I've even had developers want to understand things more so they can talk to the business and kind of work through it instead of having security team try to explain it all ourselves. Work through that.
what was the most memorable conversation that you had with the developer? It's a tough question.
It is. That's I don't know if necessarily the most memorable, but there have been times where we've talked through, or kind of talking through vulnerabilities where they'd say, hey, we see this coming out of the scanner, but it's not really applicable to our code. Our code's not vulnerable. And they'd tell us why they think about it. I'd sit down, or one of my engineers would sit down, and we'd ask a couple more questions. We'd be like, okay, well, show me this. And then as we'd walk through it, kind of showing them, and just sometimes seeing that light bulb moment on their side of, oh, I didn't think about it. This really is an issue. I'm going to go back and fix it.
Okay.
That was fun. I can go back many years ago when I was doing some testing myself as well. I was trying to test this, found a SQL injection in one of our applications. This was so I was testing it, and I, as the tester, kind of messed up my SQL query, messed up my whereabouts on it. So instead of trying to just impact one record to prove that this was an issue, I basically hosed their entire database.
Oops.
Luckily, this was a non-prod environment, but I was doing it. It was kind of late in the day. The first thing the next morning, the QA person comes to me and says, do you know what this is? And started like talking me through. I'm like, how do you know that I was doing this? It's just like, our whole database is messed up. Wasn't quite funny at the time, but so I was like, oh yeah, there's an issue. I was getting ready to write this up. They were testing, trying to get a release out the door. So although it didn't impact anything in production, it did delay them a little bit from being able to get it released out the door. But while they were working on their release, they also went and fixed that issue right away before I ever had to write it up. I didn't even get it written up, and they already had it fixed. So
Okay, well, so you
lessons learned all around.
I think it was in the end actually a positive kind of
Yes.
learning system, I would say, for everyone. Quite often also like security tools are seen, as a compliance checkbox, like we talk about it so much, in AppSec. And often it kind of leads to security debt as well. But it's also, in a sense, the only way to justifying paying for getting extra budget for the tool. It's because, let's say, some framework just recently got released, and it was mentioned there that this, let's say, vulnerability testing is compulsory, or API security is compulsory, and now we have to go to test for that. Why actually is it so hard, to get the budget for security without this checkbox?
I think, well, budgets are always tight, so trying to get people to spend money, you have to have the right justifications for that. Compliance is somewhat of a known quantity. If you're subject to like PCI or GDPR or any of those, and you have annual audits and things like that, so you can plan for that. So it's a lot easier to do something like that. Whereas security vulnerabilities, a lot of times are more theoretical until they're not, and that's until they're being exploited.
Like you mentioned.
So it's a lot harder to justify something that's theoretical versus something that is a known quantity. Yeah. And so, hey, I need a tool, I need a AppSec tool, a scanning tool for PCI compliance. It requires it. That's a lot easier to say than I need a tool to go scan this application for a whole bunch of what ifs that we may or may not have time to fix. So it's a constant balancing act from that perspective, and then just trying to understand the overall risk landscape and risk appetite of an organization. Some organizations are willing to accept a lot more risk than others. Not necessarily something I'm always comfortable with, but you need to understand that, because at the end of the day, AppSec security really is a risk management function, and what are people willing to accept?
Yeah, but I think for example, for new technologies, quite often it is there, but there's no regulations immediately in place. So you have to kind of figure out a way how to secure it and how to justify security. And you don't, without the compliance, it can be hard to get the budget, like AI that's, well, right now, I think this year, at least I know in EU, there is a EU AI Act that actually mandates some of, especially on the privacy side of things, several requirements. And I mean, you told also you're learning more and more about it, and it's becoming a bigger part of AppSec. But I think a lot of companies still have not potentially implemented like AI security tool, and what is specifically, AI security tool. When do you think is going to be like the right moment maybe for the companies to think about that?
Yeah, I think it's hard, especially with new technologies or new applications or features, is a lot of times the developers, technologists are still trying to prove it out. So they don't want to spend a lot of time adding security controls into it if they're not sure it's going to work or if it's not going to take off. So you've got this kind of, we might need security, but we need to prove it out first and, show its worth before we go back and add it in, or let's concentrate on the how do we prove it out first. At the same time, adding security in after the fact, we all know, is a lot more difficult. So again, you've got this balancing of act of how do we do it, when do we do it, do we do it in our proof of concept, do we get that out, or, do we build in that time afterwards, which also I think is very important as to why developers get trained in secure coding. So some of that stuff becomes a little more natural to them while they're building out those proof of concepts. They may not put 100% of the security controls in place, but they can take a lot more care to develop something a little bit more secure, even though it is a proof of concept or, an early stage, get it out the door.
Yeah, so it's always like a lot of overthinking, I guess, involved, whether we do it now or not. And how would you recommend someone to make the decision? Okay, let's do it now.
I think it again kind of goes back to like I was talking about, is the risk. Can you think through what is going to be your risk if you don't do it right now, we're going to prove it out. Are we putting everybody's data at risk? When you think about even like AI got built and, pushed out without a whole lot of controls, were they thinking that all of a sudden it's going to have everybody's data and all kinds of PII and everything in it and completely unsecured and all over the place? Probably not. They were thinking, hey, here's, this great thing that can help you out. So can you take that extra step of what's going to happen? Are we willing to accept that risk, even if it's for a day, a month, a year before we go back and add security controls? So kind of balancing out that and how long will it take to add those controls back in.
You're also OWASP Nashville, I think, one of the chapter leaders. Is it the kind of conversations that you aim to have when you organize chapter meetings?
Yes. So we actually have a meeting tonight.
Yeah, I think today, right?
And our topic is on AI. So we're starting to see more people want to hear more about it so that they can learn more about it, and presenters asking, can they talk about it? So I think this is a great time. Actually, I think I read somewhere that, I know, I was listening to a podcast that had mentioned that if we don't get controls, security controls in place around AI by the end of this year, it may be too late.
Okay.
So I think the fact that people are very much interested in it now, thinking about what those controls are, wanting to learn more about it, this is the perfect time to do it and get more involved with it. So in our OWASP chapter, it's great that people want to talk about it, want to hear about it, and we're starting to get more people up to speed on it.
Yeah, I think for sure the part of the community part is super important, because it also helps you to filter out through the noise. Because I think it's probably going to be the same like with the shift left, like the concept that there will be a discrepancy, between the reality and between the content or terminology that marketers create. Especially if you have to hurry, there will be just pushed so much content out there. And at least when you talk about it, with the people in person, it helps to filter out the noise.
And hopefully developers are starting to think about that while they're thinking about, how do I do secure code? How do I do, secure AI? It's just one more thing that I'm building, so I just need to make sure that I'm securing it. And it's just the same way it falls into everything else. Hopefully.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think, here it might be a bit harder in the sense that potentially AI is not always built directly by developers, but by a combination of professionals like data scientists, for example, who are not specifically in the same processes. And
Yes.
and I've already seen even like business teams training AI on some data, not in my current company, but I see in the sense that very separate teams in the larger organizations, they actually can go and help to train AI because of the shortage. So it creates like extra access to sensitive data.
That's a great point. And you've got teams now, I think like your data teams have probably been using, ML, AI for a while now before it got bigger. And that just goes to trying to make sure, again, you're building relationships in your company, getting the word out, getting that, security awareness so that you can help train people on that. Because at the end of the day, AI is going to be really hard to secure across the board. And even no matter how secure it is, we can't necessarily stop somebody from putting data into it. Like we can educate people, forever, but if data goes in, we can't necessarily stop that right now. So we can't stop people from doing that. So how do we protect it? How do we, do you encrypt it, obfuscate it, as it's going into your model? What do you do so that you can secure your data? So again, it goes back to understanding where that data is going, getting that education to everybody in your organization and making sure that, you can work through that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see in the upcoming months how it develops, for sure. And there is always a question I ask on the podcast. What advice would you, give to the young listener on the podcast? But I know that you are, for example, heavily involved as well in WiCyS and mentoring, women in application security. So what advice would you give to, for example, a woman who wants to start in AppSec or who just started her career to maybe leverage their soft skills? So what would be like the top advice that you would give to them?
I think anybody starting out, and again, we talked about soft skills. So one of the things I've noticed is I have a mentorship group through WiCyS, which is Women in Cybersecurity organization, some younger women there, and just hearing some of them talk about everybody coming in, and I don't think this is necessarily unique to women, but maybe people newer in their careers, is imposter syndrome and, being afraid, not necessarily feeling comfortable speaking up and doing it is, I'd say work on those soft skills, but don't be afraid to speak up if you have a thought or an idea. So build those relationships in a way that you feel comfortable talking to somebody. And if you have to pull somebody aside, kind of one off to talk about it, do that. But everybody's made mistakes in their life. Everybody said something that may not be,
Right.
Go into those meetings, assume positive intent. And if you may be wrong, somebody may tell you, but then that's a learning opportunity as well. And you can't be afraid to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I think every mistake is a learning opportunity in the future, and especially the beginning of the career, it might be very hard to accept make those mistakes. And if there would be a book that you could recommend to someone to read?
I think, the latest book, I have to remember which one it is, actually. Tanya Janka, so I just got her latest one. After her other one too, which she is a great AppSec, great woman in AppSec as well. I don't know her personally, but I have followed her a lot. So I think those books are great for anybody entering into AppSec, wanting to learn more, learn about secure, even developers wanting to learn just about secure coding.
For sure. It's actually second recommendation for her new book on the podcast since the release. And I filmed the podcast that's not live yet about the things I read the first book. It's one of the first that I read in AppSec, and I think it's written definitely in a way that's accessible also for different levels, which is great. The case for every book I've seen. Well, thank you so much, Linda, for coming on the podcast. It was a pleasure talking with you, and I really loved that we talked about actually some practical examples that you've implemented, and I'm looking forward to share that with the audience. Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, thanks. It was great talking.